If you've never walked into a room knowing the people inside are about to try and take your entire life apart with a smile, let me paint it for you. The invite looked harmless enough. Quarterly board review, strategic realignment. Same subject line we'd used a dozen times. Same room, same time. The only difference was the tone in my CEO's voice when he stopped by my desk the day before. Hand on the glass wall, like it suddenly needed his support. Hey, make sure you're on time tomorrow, okay? The board really wants to hear from you. Too casual. Too friendly. He hadn't called me man or buddy once. That was my first red flag. My name's Daniel. For 6 years, I was the guy you never see in the press release, but who actually makes the promises possible. Official title, Chief Operating Officer. Unofficial, the one who stays late when the CEO overpromises. The one who cleans up when sales sell something we don't have. The one who knows which server will actually catch fire if finance cuts that line item. We weren't a unicorn, just a mid-sized SaaS company in that awkward teenager phase. Too big to be startup cute. Too small to be untouchable. 2 floors of open plan ego, 20,000 paying users, and a board of 5 people who all believed they were the smartest in the room. I used to believe that too, about them. Then the numbers started slipping. It was subtle at first. A timing difference slide here, a reclassification there. Our CFO, Mark, had a gift for turning red into gray with a few arrows and a shrug. The CEO, Evan, would nod, crack a joke, and pivot to long-term vision. Every time I asked for detailed breakdowns of churn or deferred revenue, I'd get a version that felt sanded down. You worry too much, Evan would say, clapping me on the shoulder. Ops guys always think the sky is falling. Just keep the trains running. The thing about keeping trains running is you notice when someone starts quietly removing tracks. 3 weeks before that board meeting, one of my analysts forwarded me a spreadsheet at 11:47 p.m. No subject, no message, just the file. The version history didn't match what finance had shared at the last exec sync. Entire columns had been overwritten, not adjusted. Our record quarter suddenly looked a lot like... Not. I didn't explode. I didn't march into anyone's office. I sat there in the dark, read every line twice, and then did something I'd never done in my career. I called a lawyer. Not one of the ones we used for contracts. A friend of a friend. Corporate litigator, the kind of guy who talks in caveats and thinks in flowcharts. We met on a Sunday morning, in a coffee shop across town where nobody from tech goes on purpose. I brought printouts. He brought a yellow legal pad and a pen. He didn't say fraud. He circled phrases. Material misstatement. Fiduciary duty. Retaliation. He asked if there were external investors. I told him about our 2 biggest, a conservative growth fund and a family office that cared more about not being embarrassed than about hypergrowth. Don't send anything from your work email, he said, and don't confront anyone yet. You document, you breathe, you let them make the next move. The next move was the calendar invite. By the time the day came, my stomach wasn't exactly calm, but it wasn't blind panic either. I'd set up a private email on an old domain I still owned from my freelancing days. I'd forwarded what I legally could. I'd had one very careful, very boring-sounding call with the independent board member about operational risk. I hadn't accused anyone of anything. I'd just laid out how thin the ice felt. Still, walking into that boardroom felt like stepping onto a stage I hadn't rehearsed for. The room itself was all glass and performance. Long walnut table, too many chairs, the obligatory plant in the corner, slowly dying under fluorescent lights. The kind of place where people pretend their lives aren't being decided in real time. Evan was already there when I arrived, standing at the head of the table, sleeves rolled just enough to look busy. Mark, the CFO, sat to his right, scrolling on his iPad, jaw clenched. In that way, he thought, made him look serious. Across from them was Helen from HR, which was new. She didn't usually attend board meetings unless there was a comp discussion. In front of each of them sat a neat stack of paper, clipped and waiting. The board filtered in next. 2 investor reps, both in those indistinguishable Navy suits, and Alan, our independent director, ex-operator, mid-50s, the only one who'd ever asked me how my team was actually coping. He gave me a small nod when he came in, the kind that says, "I see you," without committing to anything. Last to enter was our external counsel, Jenna, from the firm that handled our corporate work. In 3 years, I'd only ever seen her on Zoom, trapped in a little square over flaky audio. Today, she was very much in the room, leather portfolio in hand, expression completely neutral. That was my second red flag. We did the usual dance at first. Revenue slide, pipeline slide, customer logos. I walked them through ops metrics, churn risk, recruiting bottlenecks. I knew my numbers cold, I always did. People nodded in the right places. Mark filled in with his smooth explanations when someone poked too close to the real gap between bookings and cash. It almost felt normal. And then Evan cleared his throat and closed his laptop with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have. "Okay," he said, looking down the table. "Thanks, Dan. That was, thorough, as always. There's one more item we need to cover before we wrap." He slid the stack of papers sitting in front of him toward me, gently, like he was offering a menu. My name was on the top page. It wasn't a performance review. It wasn't a bonus letter. Even before I read a single sentence, the thickness of it told me exactly what it was. Across the table, Jenna watched me with that particular stillness lawyers have when they already know what's inside the envelope, but need you to find out on your own. Helen from HR took a breath, folded her hands. Mark stared at his iPad as if it might save him. "Given where the company is," Evan began, voice smooth, "and in alignment with the board, we think it's time to make some changes in leadership." I didn't pick up the pen. I didn't flip the page yet. I just rested my hand on the paper, felt the weight of it, and realized the thing I hadn't fully admitted to myself until that moment. They honestly thought I'd walk into this room with nothing. I didn't open the packet right away. That's the part they never expect. The silence. The moment you don't rush. Don't panic. Don't play the role they wrote for you. I just sat there with my fingertips on the edge of the paper while Evan kept talking as if he were narrating a training video. "It's a standard separation agreement," he said. "We've put together a generous package considering a recent performance misalignment." He actually winced at his own phrasing, like he knew how flimsy it sounded. I finally flipped the first page. A full release of claims, non-disparagement, confidentiality, immediate resignation for personal reasons, forfeiture of unvested equity, all of it, a statement pre-written in corporate PR language, where I accept responsibility for operational deficiencies contributing to forecast volatility, and a gag clause, so tight it practically wrapped around my throat. My voice didn't shake. "You want me to sign this today?" Mark jumped in before Evan could answer. "It's really in your best interest, Dan. If you drag this out, the board could classify this as a performance dismissal. You don't want that on your record." There was no threat in his tone, which somehow made it worse. He spoke like someone who'd rehearsed lines fed to him by someone else. "Take your time to read it," Helen added softly. HR's soft, the kind designed to sound maternal. "But yes, the expectation is that we conclude this before close of business." My heartbeat was steady. Too steady. That kind of quiet only comes when the anger's controlled, not absent. "Tell me," I asked, "which operational deficiencies are we talking about? The ones we flagged 3 quarters in a row? The ones you told me not to spook the room with?" Mark's jaw twitched. Evan forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You've been difficult," he said. "Too negative. The board needs aligned leadership." "Aligned with what, exactly?" "Strategy," he answered, but the hesitation was microscopic, enough to confirm what I'd suspected for weeks. They were terrified, not of me, of the truth. I leaned back, studying them, not the paper. People reveal themselves when they think they're winning. Evan's foot tapped under the table. Mark kept scrolling, pretending to check numbers he already knew by heart. Even Helen's breathing changed. Shallow, careful. "You mentioned the board is aligned," I said. "Funny, no one asked me a single operational question today." "We're trying to keep this professional," Evan replied, tight now. "Please don't make this harder." I closed the packet gently. "I'll need independent counsel to review this." Silence. A deep, fracturing silence. Not dramatic. Just wrong. Like a dropped glass that hasn't hit the floor yet. Evan exchanged a quick look with Mark. The kind of look that says he wasn't supposed to say that. "Dan," he tried again, calm turning brittle, "we're offering you a clean, discreet transition. Dragging lawyers into this is unnecessary. And it could turn adversarial. You don't want that. We don't want that." "Then why is our external counsel sitting right here?" I asked, glancing at Jenna. She didn't speak. "Lawyers don't speak unless the script requires it." But her eyes flickered. Not pity, not alliance, just acknowledgement. She knew exactly what was happening, and she knew I knew. "That's different," Evan said quickly. "She's here for us, for the company." Meaning not for me, meaning sign quietly or be crushed publicly. I felt the smallest pulse of heat in my chest, not rage, but clarity. Because in that moment I finally understood their timing. The quarter was about to close, investor calls were coming, and they needed someone to pin the cracks on. Someone who wouldn't fight back. Someone they thought still believed in them. But that wasn't the trap they should have worried about. I pushed the packet slightly forward, just enough to make them think I might hand it back. "If you're confident in this process," I said, "then putting our discussion in the board minutes shouldn't be a problem, right?" Mark straightened. "What?" "Let's document every statement," I continued, "every reason for my removal, every assessment of operational failures, every financial assumption used to justify this." Evan's smile finally cracked. "Dan, don't do this." "Do what? Ask for clarity, transparency? You told the entire company those were our values." "You're turning this adversarial," Mark muttered, but his voice didn't have weight behind it. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't even tense. My tone was so steady it made Evan lean back slightly, as if he finally noticed the door behind him was no longer fully closed. I looked at the board members. "Before I sign anything, I want it acknowledged in the minutes that I requested independent counsel." The investor reps avoided eye contact. Alan, the independent director, held my gaze for a second too long. Not a message, not a cue, just a confirmation that he was listening. And something inside me settled. Not triumph, not relief, just the certainty that I would not pretend to be grateful while handing them the knife. "I'm not signing today," I said evenly. "I'm not resigning today, and I'm not taking responsibility for numbers that weren't generated by my team." Evan exhaled sharply, frustration breaking through the veneer. "You're making a mistake. If you walk out of here without signing, the board will have to consider a removal for cause." I let that hang in the air, slow and heavy. Then I said, "Do what you need to do." They didn't know it yet, but that decision would cost them everything. And this moment, where the room shifted and the air thinned, this was the night I stopped being the hero. Evan called for a short recess, but nobody moved. He stood anyway, smoothing his shirt, like he needed to reset himself physically before trying again. When he walked out into the hallway, Mark followed, whispering urgently. The door didn't close all the way. I could hear fragments. "Not supposed to push." "He's bluffing." "Just force the vote." Bluffing. People mistake quiet for weakness. That's always been their first mistake. I stayed at the table, the unsigned packet in front of me. The board members shifted uncomfortably, pretending to review notes. Alan kept his eyes on me, not supportive, not hostile, just attentive, like someone watching a fuse burn and waiting to see how long it is. 5 minutes passed, then 10. When the door finally opened again, Evan's entire demeanor had changed. The friendliness was gone. So was the attempt at gentle persuasion. He sat down, folded his hands, and said, "Let's proceed." The room stilled. Given Daniel's refusal to sign, he continued, "I propose that the board remove him for cause, effective immediately." He looked directly at the investor reps as he said it, not at me, at them, as if I were a piece of furniture being moved out of a room. "His behavior today is disruptive. It jeopardizes the company's ability to move forward," Mark chimed in. "We have to send a message that leadership misalignment won't be tolerated." I didn't speak, not yet. I watched the investors' faces instead. Two professionals who'd weathered more boardroom betrayals than anyone here. They didn't nod. They didn't object. They didn't move. They just listened. Evan took their silence as approval and pressed harder. "So let the minutes reflect," he said, "that we are proceeding with a removal vote if Daniel does not sign the agreement today." He leaned back, confident, too confident, because he still believed the room belonged to him. I finally reached into my bag. The motion stopped mid-sentence. I didn't take out a laptop or a phone or anything dramatic. I pulled out a plain, cream-colored envelope, the kind that looks almost disappointingly boring, like it belongs to someone who still sends handwritten checks. I placed it on the table, not toward Evan, not toward HR, but directly in front of Jenna, our external counsel. Her expression didn't change, but her posture did, a subtle, near imperceptible straightening that only a lawyer would make when sensing something legally combustible. "This," I said calmly, "needs to be entered into the minutes before any vote." Evan forced a laugh. "What is that supposed to be?" "A document," I replied, "that supersedes the agenda for today." Jenna opened the envelope. She read the first page. Stopped. Read it again, slower this time. The room's temperature shifted. You could feel it, a tightening of the air, the sudden silence of people realizing they've missed something crucial. The investors leaned in. Alan removed his glasses. Mark swallowed hard, soundlessly. It was only when Jenna reached page 3 that she finally looked at Evan, and for the first time since she walked into the room, her neutrality cracked, just slightly, but enough. "Evan," she said, her voice low, controlled, "we need to pause." "What is it?" he asked, irritation creeping in. She didn't answer him. She stood, stepped away from the table, and spoke to the security liaison, stationed outside the door. He always waited there during board meetings. Standard protocol. I'd passed him hundreds of times, never paid attention. Today he stepped into the room. "Is there a problem?" Evan asked, half standing. "Sit," Jenna said quietly. "Please." She wasn't asking. The investors finally spoke, the older one clearing his throat before saying, "I'd like this clarified, now." So I clarified. 48 hours ago, I began, the majority equity holders executed a written consent, fully valid under our corporate bylaws, removing Evan as CEO and Mark as CFO, effective immediately upon signature. Evan's eyes widened, a faint shake of disbelief. "That's not possible. You can't." "I didn't," I said. "They did." Mark's face drained of color. I continued, calm, steady, unhurried. "The consent appoints me interim CEO solely for operational continuity during the investigation." I nodded toward the document. "It also directs security and IT to restrict access of any removed officers the moment corporate counsel is notified, which, for the record," I gestured at Jenna, "has now occurred." A beat of silence, then another, and then the room exploded without anyone raising their voice. Mark grabbed his iPad, pressing random buttons as if access might magically reappear. Evan reached for his laptop, opened it, waited, and then stared as the password screen rejected him twice, 3 times, and finally flashed red. Security stepped in closer, not aggressively, not dramatically, just present, the way trained professionals are when procedure takes over. "This is absurd," Evan snapped. "You can't just—" It's binding, Jenna said, and it's in effect. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. Lawyers don't gloat. They deliver facts like surgeons making incisions, precise, irreversible. The investor rep folded his hands. We will, of course, conduct a full review, but for now, the consent stands. Evan looked between them, trying to anchor himself to any remaining ally. Even Helen from HR wouldn't meet his gaze. Please gather any personal items, the security liaison said. We'll escort you to collect the rest later. Procedural, polite, devastating. Evan's voice cracked on the next word. You blindsided us. No, I said quietly. You blindsided yourselves. I just stopped pretending not to see it. Security didn't touch them. They didn't need to. The loss of access was the real removal, the digital guillotine. Without credentials, Evan and Mark were ghosts in their own company. As they walked out, Mark turned back, expression twisted. You think this makes you the hero? I met his eyes. No, it just stops me from being your alibi. They were gone a moment later. The door shut behind them with a soft, final click. And then, for the first time in that entire room, there was real silence. Heavy, honest silence, the kind that means something's gone wrong for the people who thought they were untouchable. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. They thought the worst part for me was over when the door closed behind them. It wasn't. But for the first time in a long time, it was at least fair. The boardroom felt bigger once Evan and Mark were gone. Same glass walls, same plant in the corner, same stack of papers in front of me. But the gravity had shifted. For years, everything in that room orbited around Evan's voice. Now there was just the hum of the air conditioner and the faint tapping of someone's pen against a legal pad. Jenna cleared her throat first. We need to be very precise from this point forward, she said. The consent is valid, but the way we proceed will determine how painful this is for the company. She was looking at the board, not at me, which was fair. On paper, I was now the interim CEO. In reality, I was a guy who'd walked into a board meeting expecting to be fired and walked out with a job he wasn't sure he wanted. The older investor rep leaned forward. Daniel, he said, how long have you known? He didn't mean known as in suspected. He meant how long I'd had proof. 3 weeks since the first spreadsheet discrepancy, I answered. Longer since I started feeling that the story in the room didn't match the numbers on my screen. And you went straight to counsel? I went to outside counsel first, I said. I wanted to understand the difference between being paranoid and being right. Then I came to Alan. I nodded at the independent director. I didn't accuse anyone. I laid out what Ops was seeing, what we were being told to say, and what would happen if those lines diverged much further. Alan didn't smile. He just confirmed it with a small nod. He was careful, he said. No drama, just facts. That's why I took it to the investors instead of treating it like a personality conflict. I'd expected, that first day in the coffee shop, for the lawyer to tell me I was overreacting, that it was just messy accounting, that I should keep my head down, collect a paycheck, and wait for the inevitable restructuring. Instead, he'd asked one question that stuck with me. If this blows up, do you want your name on the side that tried to ask quietly? Or the one that signed the press release? Everything after that was cause and effect. The investors had demanded a deeper look. Their own analysts had compared internal dashboards with official board decks and found the same creative timing differences my team had been tripping over. They didn't storm in, they didn't send threats. They just did what people with real money do. They considered their risk. The written consent was their version of pulling the emergency brake. In the boardroom, the conversation turned from me to the company. Audit committee, special investigation, regulator notifications. Jenna walked them through the mechanics, appointing an independent firm, preserving emails, freezing certain approvals. It was dry, dense, and utterly necessary. At some point, someone asked, Daniel, are you willing to step in as interim CEO while we work through this? It wasn't a triumphant moment. There was no slow clap, No vindication montage. Just a tired man being asked to hold up a building someone else had set on fire. "I'll stabilize operations," I said. "I'll protect my team. I'll cooperate fully with the investigation. But I'm not here to pretend this never happened." That became my job description. The next few weeks were worse than that board meeting. It had to unwind years of access patterns. Finance had to reconstruct real numbers without marketing adjustments. Middle managers, the ones who'd been parroting whatever came from the top, suddenly discovered the limits of plausible deniability. People cried in conference rooms. People updated their resumes in bathrooms. People who defended Evan in public started rewriting history in private. We held an all-hands the day after the board meeting. I stood where Evan usually stood, under the same soft lighting, in front of the same company logo. I didn't give them a motivational speech. I didn't tell them we were stronger than ever. I told them the truth. We've had discrepancies between what we've been telling the outside world and what our internal metrics show, I said. Our investors are aware. An independent firm will be reviewing our financials. Some people in leadership have left the company. Others may leave as the process continues. My job, for as long as I'm in this role, is to keep this place honest and keep you informed as much as I'm legally allowed to. You could feel the fear in the room, the anger, the betrayal, but you could also feel something else. Relief, because everyone had felt the disconnect. They'd just been gaslit into calling it ambition. One engineer raised his hand. "Is my job safe?" "I can't promise that no one will be affected," I said. "I can promise that if there are cuts, they'll be driven by reality, not by someone trying to hit a story they sold 6 months ago." It wasn't the answer he wanted. It was the only one I could live with. As the investigation unfolded, the picture became clearer and uglier. Mark had been pulling revenue forward, classifying discounts as temporary incentives, burying churn behind aggressive expansion assumptions. Evan hadn't typed the formulas himself, but he'd approved the decks, pushed the narrative, dismissed questions with charm and pressure. There was no dramatic perp walk. There were letters, there were tense calls, there were quietly updated LinkedIn profiles that went from visionary leader to seeking new opportunities overnight. There was an eventual notice from a regulator about ongoing inquiries. Helen from HR resigned a month later, not in disgrace. She hadn't doctored numbers. But she'd sat in rooms where people were being cornered into mutual separations to protect forecasts. At some point, she looked at her own reflection and decided she'd had enough. The board restructured. One investor stepped down. Another rotated in someone with a stronger operational background. We reforecast the year honestly. The new numbers were embarrassing compared to the old story, but they were at least attached to reality. I slept badly through all of it. Not because I regretted anything, but because being right didn't feel like winning. It felt like carrying a weight you didn't ask for but couldn't put down without dropping it on someone else. When the dust finally settled, about 6 months later, the question I'd been avoiding stopped being avoidable. "Do you want the role permanently?" the investor asked me over a coffee in the same building where it all started. I thought about it, really thought about it. About the power, the title, the control over which promises we made, about the pay, about the late nights, the constant target on your back, the temptation to start bending the truth just a little, for the greater good. "No," I said, "I don't." He didn't look surprised. "Why not?" "Because somewhere along the way," I said, "we turned being a good operator into being the person who absorbs everyone else's lies. I'm not doing that again. Not for them, not for you, not even for a better version of this place." We negotiated my exit like adults. No gag clauses, no rewritten history. I got a fair severance, my earned equity, and a letter that described my role in stabilizing the company without pretending I had been thrilled to be there. Evan and Mark didn't go to prison. Real life rarely lines up with comment section fantasies. But their reputations took the kind of hit you don't fully recover from in a small industry. Recruiters asked questions now. So did investors. People remembered the headlines when their names popped up on new decks. I took a few months off, walked my dog without checking Slack, went to the grocery store in the middle of the day, remembered what it felt like to have a calendar that didn't belong to someone else. Eventually, I took a role as a consultant, helping early-stage founders set up systems that don't require someone like me to lie for them later. Smaller companies, fewer boardrooms, more blunt conversations. Sometimes people ask me if I'd do it again. If, knowing what it would cost, I'd still slide that envelope across the table. I always think back to that moment when my name was on top of a packet I was never meant to read carefully, only to sign. To the feeling of the paper under my hand, to the quiet realization that the people I'd been holding up would drop me the second it became convenient. So yes, I'd do it again, because that board meeting wasn't the day they tried to take everything from me. It was the day I stopped giving them more than they'd earned.